Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Trekyards. I am Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Coggins, and special guest.
Lieutenant Commander Waltke, live long and prosper.
Tell us who you are, Aaron, in case people don't know.
Yes. So I am currently the head writer and co-executive producer of Star Trek Prodigy.
Well, my first question, honestly, is about the cube, because we see a shot of it with the Protostar. We know the Protostar is not a big ship. Now, it is perspective shot, so it's not one of the big 3-kilometer big cubes, is it? Is it a regular size cube?
Or is it?
Borg ships and Borg constructs, as we've seen, kind of take all shapes and sizes as needed. You know, in my personal headcanon, which I guess in this case could be canon, is that the Borg had started to build sort of a new invasion fleet, which is why you start to see some of the new iconography that you see in the artifact, for instance. But then that's when the neurolytic pathogen struck and kind of threw the whole collective into disarray, and weakened them to be defeated or shut down or what have you.
When was the Borg as a concept thought to be brought in? I mean, obviously you were a Delta Quadrant show, but you can go anywhere, so that's just the concept. Did you know Borg from the first season writers' room? When was that thought of, and how much did you think we can truly explore versus kids show, fun, light, horror show?
One of the mandates of our show was be sort of like an introduction to Star Trek, right? And I think we all felt it would be extremely difficult, but we would also be very remiss if we didn't include the Borg, because they have such an outsized presence in the franchise. Of course, the difficulty we were facing here is that, there are going to be young audiences watching, and also there was the whole issue of like the Borg ostensibly being defeated in Endgame. And so we kind of talked with some of the other productions, and then also really did our homework and realized that, that doesn't necessarily mean that the Borg ceased to be. It just means that they're in sort of or they're on their heels, right? And so the idea, I think we came to this conclusion of like, oh, there is a way that, if the Borg were weakened by Endgame, that there would probably be a lot of derelict Borg ships, as we've seen plenty of in Picard and Voyager especially. We were like, oh, maybe there's an interesting opportunity here to explore the legacy of the Borg. And as we hear in Picard season 2, I think Jurati straight up says, the Borg as we know them are effectively decimated and functionally hobbled, but they never go into detail what that means. And in my mind, and I believe in the Picard writers' room mind, that was referring to the aftermath of Voyager, that the neurolytic pathogen had severely sort of crippled them and damaged them in some way to make them not the threat that they once were. As we kind of went back and forth of like what that would look like, we're like, well, obviously they, it's implied in Picard season 1, some of them, might have easily been shut down. And then we were like, it makes complete sense to us that it would also be like, what would be something that would make them not as effective, and it would be disable their nanoprobes. Like that. I feel like that always, to my mind, made them the greatest threat, because you're within 3 inches of them and bam, you're a Borg. So if you make that take that out of the equation, and as we've seen in Voyager, nanoprobes also do a bunch of other stuff, like bioregeneration, and they're capable of, I think, being reprogrammed for all manner of things. If you suddenly chop them off at the knees, then suddenly they're, in a way, they're a little bit like the old school TNG Borg, where they had to fall back on using assimilation chambers and Borg implants, and the fact that half their fleet, was sort of decimated by this neurolytic pathogen. It made for an interesting thing. It's like, well, maybe, if it's like a salvage mission gone wrong, then maybe that would actually be something that our crew could survive. As far as like the kids boarding a Borg cube, we're like, well, we've seen so many missions in Starfleet where that's almost Starfleet protocol at this point, where they're like, oh, there's a damaged Borg cube, let's send Neelix over and scope it out.
And can I just say, that was very dense. There's so much to unpack there. My goodness, they think it through, guys. Stuart, where do you want to hit? Because that's so dense and stuff.
It answers a lot of our questions that we had initially, like why no tubule assimilation and stuff like that. So that's fine. They're also coming out like a hibernation, so they're a little bit not themselves. That's why they're not attacking the protostar.
They're also cut off from the collective, yeah.
probably can't say, but are they going to make a return in Prodigy? Because now you've introduced them to the most advanced ship in Starfleet, as well as a weapon from the future. You think the Borg might go, hey, that could be good, you know?
Yeah, I mean, you're right that I can't say, but what I can say is like we've already seen in other shows that they are still around in some form or another. So they're not gone. I'll say that.
I mean, we want to see Borg Rhino again.
Oh, he was
Yes.
cool.
Who doesn't love a good Borg Rhino?
Yeah. And I said to Stuart, it's such a good 3D model, he's going to come back, or at least his races, because that's a really good model for such a small screen time. It was like, Rhino's coming back.
That was something we also talked about, is like I was always obsessed with the Borg always talk about assimilating thousands of worlds, but usually we only see just mostly humanoid. Sometimes they might have like a little nose ridge or something. For instance, Unimatrix Zero, I think they assimilate a Klingon, and I'm like, yes, more of that, please. We talked about it originally. We were talking about like, what if there was a Gorn Borg, which I think we even have a Gorn Borg around our office, but it was such an asset-heavy show. We were like, or we could just use one of the other alien races we've already created for Tars Lamora.
Stuart was right.
I'd seen it before. Yeah. Okay. Good.
But last of all, I want to end on the thing you said right at the start, which we skipped because it was a big deal with the nanoprobes idea, because that was our big conceit of the episode. They weren't functionally working like the Borg we'd seen for so many years. Was that said in dialogue that they were lost from the collective, that they nanoprobes don't work? I didn't clock that in the watch. Neither did Stuart.
Yeah, as they're flying in, there's a line from Hologram Janeway that says, "It seems this." I'm going off of memory, so forgive me. She says something like, "It seems this cube went dark for a reason. Neurolytic pathogen disabled their nanoprobes and shut down their drones, which makes entering tricky but doable."
So more of a general statement.
I
Okay.
didn't have it. It would have felt unnatural to say it permanently disabled all nanoprobes throughout the collective.
Yeah.
Because they were talking specifically about this cube, but that it is in there that straight up says, at least in this cube, a neurolytic pathogen, which by logic, A plus B equals C, that same neurolytic pathogen affected other Borg cubes as well, because she struck it at.
Well, ideally all of them. That's the whole point of the thing. Was
exactly.
As many as possible.
Yes. Like if it happened to this cube, it probably happened to if not all the rest.
Because it certainly implied that the nanoprobes are so integral to the Borg that it helps them function. I would assume if they were actually deactivated, the Borg couldn't live. Especially if they're deactivated without the ability to repair, they would be dead or independent from the collective. So I'm kind of surprised if they're deactivated, there's no longer a link to the collective, nor nanoprobes. Why are they still functioning any like Borg without being alive or awake? Sorry.
Well, that's actually an interesting question, because there was a stretch where they didn't seem to have nanoprobes at all in the history of the Borg.
Which I didn't consider until you brought up earlier. Yeah, we did. They're very TNG-like. We noted that the armor's very TNG, the color's very TNG.
So I guess the implied canon, or head canon, I suppose I should say, is like, I know, and I subscribe to this belief as well among Star Trek fans. It's like there was a period between TNG and Voyager where they had assimilated a species that had the nanoprobe technology, and that made them far more formidable. And so without that, they kind of reverted back to an earlier state where they had to rely purely on Borg implants and assimilation chambers, but it made them not as dangerous. And I think the weakened bioregeneration, it's never really explained in Voyager how the bioregenerative field works, but there is a bioregenerative field that exists, especially in the episode Unity, for instance, where that's how I think Chakotay heals some people, just by pumping a field through their.
So is that intentional then, that when they're in the vinculum, there's only one voice rather than the every voice? Is that implying that a mind, an alien on the cube who was just of a race had a more powerful brain, they sort of took that leadership role? Because there was not a chorus of voices, and if there's no collective, that makes sense.
The chorus is sort of there, but if you listen very carefully, you can hear other voices that are kind of like whispering and chattering and talking. So I think it's meant
just
to
more
be
subtle than normal.
Yes, I agree, and that's because they, as I said, they're this is a damaged Borg cube, and so they are trying. It's a little bit like what was that episode, Collective, with Icheb, right? Where after a certain point, like they just started trying to recreate the collective, but they were still kind of in disarray, and some of their individual personalities were kind of, they were communicating, but it wasn't quite the chorus that you're used to. I will say that, if you listen very carefully to those Borg whispers, you might recognize a familiar voice or two.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
The only bonus thing I'd say is that based on the design of the Borg interior, like the people and everything you just said, I would like to think that that cube itself is just an older cube, and so they still have TNG era Borg primarily, who were given nanoprobes. When those things went offline, they still had their initial version. So First Contact Borg, who were made from nanoprobes, would be more inclined just to die or be disconnected. But these guys were older, hence the pale look. Small note, but since there are trillions of Borg, you'll have generational Borg that have been Borg for 50 years, 100 years, 300 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it could just be just like a disease, the nanoprobes are in their system, but they're just messed up,
Ooh,
like
that's a twist. Nanoprobes,
like they could have, maybe the nanoprobes are screwed up. It's we don't go one way or the other, but the point being.
And the fact is, the Janeway from the future, that they already defeated the Borg. They have, the weapon is literally designed to kill the Borg. Final, end, full stop. So therefore, it should be insanely effective, and there's no caveats can happen because of the time change. But it's like that should be massively effective.
Yeah, and I think it was, and as I said, I think in Picard they say they're like there's a few still around, but
don't worry about them.
It's like the last days. It's like the last days of the dinosaurs, right? There was an extinction event where the asteroid. This is a history lesson now. There was an extinction event where the asteroid Chicxulub struck the Earth, right? But there's evidence to suggest that like dinosaurs still kind of sort of survived for maybe a couple thousand years, but they were a dying race, and they were very much.
And they adapted.
So what he's saying is you're going to find a Borg city ship at some point, just like the Voth.
Yes,
they left Earth, and
I'm canonically saying that the Voth have been assimilated by the Borg, and that's a threat that you will see in future. No, I'm not.
I love it. Fantastic. All right, well, thanks, Aaron. That was very informative, very insightful. It's all there if you can ask the writer.
It's always fun to chat with you. So thank you for joining us for another Trekyards. I'm sure you'll be back. I'm sure we'll have lots to talk about during the course.
We have past Aaron that will come out after this because we did other interviews.
That's true. We talked a little bit over the summer.
All right. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everybody for watching. So until next time, this is Trekyards. I'm Captain Foley.
I'm Connor Cockins and guest.
Lieutenant Commander Waltke. Peace and long life.
Thanks, guys. Bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.